The Sound Off Podcast. The show about podcast and broadcast. Starts now.
Do you know how many times we've done this?
I do not.
Do you want to guess?
I like the tradition. Is it, 8?
It's 9.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's kind of fun. It is what's the word I'm looking for? It's a marker.
Tradition.
It's a tradition. It's a marker of our friendship. Oh, I see you're recording, so I better sit up. It's a marker of our friendship and a marker of the start of your company, eh? The podcasting company, the Sound Off Podcast Cabinet.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Yep. It's as old as the podcast is.
I can't believe you're still doing this. Does anybody watch this? Does anybody give a shit anymore?
Yes, they do. I think we're just made to feel that way because we don't get the feedback we used to. Like when you used to play a Def Leppard record, people would call up and say, "This is shit, play Blue Rodeo."
Yeah, or when I would play Duran Duran and say, "This is shit, we'll be right back." I still run into people who remember that and give me hell for it.
What happened?
Well, I just when we were playing Duran Duran, I was working at CHOM at the time, and CHOM was a rock station. I mean, it was a hardcore. It was known as AOR back then, right? It was, Black Betty and Boston and Aerosmith and, Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and Duran Duran. What? So, I would make the odd not off color, but I would make the odd comment, which you weren't supposed to do, drove programmers crazy. But I wasn't going to lie to anybody. It just wasn't my cup of tea, and I didn't think it fit. And Duran Duran fans let me know all about it. And a woman ran into me like a year ago and said, I loved Duran Duran. She, I was like, I don't know, 30 years ago. She never forgot. But I think that's also a nice, it's a nice tip of the cap to how radio is supposed to work and how it used to work. And I've really noticed that since I got back to Quebec. I can't believe, people still recognize me and want to talk about, my tenure there.
So the Duran Duran, wouldn't that be like when you first started at CHOM, like 84, 85? Okay.
Yeah.
So just
85.
Just to let you know, that's more than 30 years.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
But I can see a song. I do recall your show back in the 80s used to play a lot of stuff that CHOM didn't play the rest of the day. Yeah. There was, Human League.
Yeah. Well, there was a time at CHOM where CHOM really struggled in the mid 80s to figure out which direction, there was, believe it or not, and for people who don't know, CHOM is a rock station in Montreal that had, a similar relationship with the city that CFOX did in Vancouver, that CITI did in Winnipeg, that CHOM-FM and Q107 did in Toronto. CHOM was that for Montreal. So when the new wave started, there was long conversations and many arguments and about which direction the station should take, and should they move away and head in towards new music. As you point out, Human League, Duran Duran. I don't remember a lot of the bands because a lot of them are forgotten now. And the hardcore rock won out, thank goodness. At one point, there was a discussion when consultants took over back before I got there as to whether or not the station should change to a disco format. And we narrowly avoided that disaster. There was I think you're probably right, Matt. It probably was at the point where we were tiptoeing and trying to blend in, like you say, Human League and Duran Duran and, bands, those British sort of what was called New Wave at the time. How do we fit that stuff in? How do we make it work without ignoring it?
Yeah, and I just knowing what I know about music from 1985, that was a really, really tough year outside of top 40.
Yeah.
And so I look at the charts from 85, and it was all solo acts. So Glenn Frey is on his own.
Yeah.
I think members of Fleetwood Mac were doing things on their own. Genesis was doing things on their own.
Yeah. Yeah.
On and on.
Yeah, there was a lot of that, and I guess there's a version of that going on today. We were talking about it. I forget who I saw. I think it was somebody on television said, "I'm dying to hear real instruments in music today because everything is so not overwhelmed, but so dominated by the technology that's in the music business now, and the electronics, the solo artists, I'm often watching Saturday Night Live, and I'll turn to my wife Jess and say, who is this? Who is this person with this, skimpily dressed person dancing to a band that isn't there? And I know that makes me sound like 100, but you know what I'm talking about. If you watched there's a great documentary right now on Crave called Yacht Rock, and they explore the genesis of what's become known as yacht rock. Steely Dan, the Doobie Brothers, the members of Toto, and it all grew out of musicianship. When Steely Dan made a record, they wanted the best musicians they could find, and they were dictators in the studio and wanted perfection. So, I just watched an old documentary on Terry Kath from Chicago, which is on Prime if you want to dig around and find it. It was done by his daughter, and they have a lot of great footage of Chicago. The horn section. Terry Kath was an unbelievable guitar player, great drummer, great bass player. And that era that's gone now. I don't think anybody knows who's playing guitar for Taylor Swift, and I'm not sure anybody knows who played on the Charlie XXX Charlie X record, or whatever her name is. So, like I said, it makes me sound a little bit out of touch, but anybody who grew up in the era that we did understands what I'm talking about, I think.
So you touched on two things. I'm glad you mentioned the Saturday Night Live guest, because I watched the episode with is it McKee? Oh, you missed that episode, did you?
I did.
I'm not even sure.
The musical guest?
Yeah. Okay.
McKee?
Anyway, yeah. Anyway, the song's playing, and I have to turn to the younger generation in the house and say, does the police know that their music is being replicated right now?
Well, I'm sure Sting is happy because I guess he gets paid a royalty every time somebody lifts something, I suppose. But, I don't think, you can scream boomer at me. I'm the retired guy who didn't comb his hair this morning. But I think that you can't deny that if you put on a Steely Dan record, or, take your pick, Zeppelin, any of that era, where you had to go into the studio with musicians and a producer and get drum sounds and, tune the snare and get what you were, that was a whole sort of, that was part of the stew of making a record. And today it's, just the knobs and the samples and, auto tune, and, there's more. I think I'm trying to think of an example of a band that's out now, and you can help me, Matt. Is there a band out now that is, like Nathaniel Rateliff? Love him. There's a couple of other ones, whose names are escaping me. But by and large, top 40 radio is boo, 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 boo. You know what I mean? And there's again, probably the era I was raised in, but there's this kind of a I don't know, inauthentic plasticness to it.
Yeah, so I'm imagining the person in their room half naked with a computer playing around with the auto tune in
Yeah.
between matching tracks, whacking off, and coming back to finish up the song.
Hope there's a lock on their door.
I'm glad you also mentioned the Yacht Rock, because I watched that documentary the other night.
It was cool.
And that was my biggest. I had a bunch of things that I learned, but the big one was the fact that people would get out of bed every day and bring their instrument and had to go to work because they were going to be in a studio and do things with other people.
Yeah.
And as I sit almost 10 years of my life doing this, I go, I've just spent 10 years working like this online, and it's worked, especially during the pandemic. But I'm like, what am I missing by not getting together with other people in a room and writing the things that I want to write, doing the podcasts I want to do, doing the shows I want to do, the concepts, the ideas. And I also yeah. And, go one step further.
Yeah.
The Sopranos documentary, the David Chase one from earlier this year, which I rewatched. I never rewatch anything, but I watched this again, and I may watch it a third time. Just, how brilliance happens.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I've come to learn over the years is whether you're talking about The Godfather or The Sopranos or Steely Dan or, Quincy Jones and Michael Jackson and Eddie Van Halen and Steve Lukather and all of those people, one of the things about all of these projects that achieved a high level of excellence, they're all collaborative. There are no dumb ideas, and there are all people, smashing heads together in a room, arguing and fighting, and out of that comes an incredible product. I was in the music business for about 3 years with Streetheart and Queen City Kids and a couple of other acts. And one of my tasks was to be with Streetheart when they were making a couple of records. And I was really, as a young guy who didn't know anything about making music, I was really taken with the process in the studio. The first thing that I remember being witness to was drum sounds. When records are being made like they were in those days, the drums would be set up and the producer would say, no, move the mic just a little bit to the left where the kick is, and move that other mic under the snare and point it to the right. And then the drummer would sit there for like 7 hours going thwack, 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 while the producer, adjusted the EQ and moved the mics and found the sound he was looking for. Like when you think of the snare sound that you hear on Def Leppard and the snare sound that you hear on Back in Black, that's Mutt Lange. Those are Mutt Lange's ears and his collaboration with the band to come up with those sounds. And I think something is lost when you as you point out, sit in your room with a computer and a mixing board and a porn channel and make a record. It's just not the same thing to me.
My company never took off until I actually went to conferences in the U.S. and began to meet people and network and find ideas. So leave your home, get out.
Yes, go do things.
So I was also learning things about Steely Dan in the Yacht Rock documentary. I understand Reeling in the Years. I probably didn't enjoy Peg as much as I should have. The only time I come across Steely Dan songs is between 6 and 8 on a Saturday or Sunday morning on CHOM, where Too Tall, who was the personality on the air at the time, would take a pen and scratch out what I programmed, and he would play the Steely Dan songs that got a lot of the credit.
Yeah.
Black Friday being one, the Aja record.
Yeah.
I didn't understand Steely Dan, but I think I understand it now.
I bet you do. I highly encourage anybody who loves music to dive in. I picked up, I didn't know anything about Steely Dan other than Reeling in the Years. And when I got to CITI FM in Winnipeg, Steve Young and a guy named Bob McBride who was our midday guy back in the late 70s, early 80s at CITI FM, was a Steely Dan fanatic. And Bad Sneakers, My Old School, Reelin' in the Ears, Peg, Don't Do It Again, Caves of Altamira. They're like, if you love beautiful sound and great playing and great melodies, you should dive into the Steely Dan catalog. Better if you can do it on vinyl or a CD, but even if you do it on Spotify, go ahead and dive in. There's an unbelievable catalog of meticulously put together records that are really, they're technical, but they're soulful, and they have such a high level of musicianship with great melodies, and it really is remarkable. And I came to understand it a little better as I got older. And what really surprised me about that Yacht Rock documentary is, they pretty much said that Steely Dan was the genesis of that genre of music, because of all the musicians that played on those records and went on to do other things in that now tagged yacht rock genre. They've become one of my favorite bands. We listen to a lot of vinyl in the house, and we have a lot of Steely Dan next to the turntable.
Nice.
Yeah. I don't know if it's a boring story, but it's a good story if you like music and records.
Well, I wanted to be conscious about spoilers and stuff, but I don't give a rip. You should have watched this by now. So
yeah.
And yeah. I'm not telling tales out of class here either, because it's documented stuff. It's history.
If you're, one of the 11 people that's going to watch this, because who's the guy with the messy hair? What does he do? I used to be on the radio, and Matt and I are friends. And we've been doing this for 9 years. I didn't realize that. But, if you're watching this podcast, no doubt you're a fan of music and radio. Dive into the Steely Dan catalog. I highly recommend it.
And my spoiler I wanted to protect was the guys in Toto having such a big footprint and
unbelievable
being wait a second. These were the nerds who made Pamela, Roseanne, and Africa.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really it, but I didn't know that one of them had a hand in Thriller.
Yeah.
I didn't know that they had been on everything. Like, they actually would go to work and be on great records. And my job was to go through the catalog and the record to see who played on it. And who are these guys?
They would, I remember, being a kid and, in the era of the vinyl, much like your cereal box that you would read at the table in the morning, when you bought a record, you'd put it on the turntable and then you would sit with the album cover and go through the liner notes. I did anyway, and I think a lot of people did. And I would see these names popping up. And that's when I started to think, geez, I wonder what a producer does, because I've seen this name, this Mutt Lange name keeps coming up, or Steve Lukather, Jeff Porcaro, Skunk Baxter. All of these names kept popping up on these records. And what you learn in the documentary is, some of these guys would kiss their wives goodbye in the morning and put their guitar in the case and then go do Thriller and then go do, another record. And they'd be gone all day going to different studio sessions, walking in and either playing or singing on a record. And I like I said, I had no idea that the guys in Toto and Steely Dan were the genesis of this yacht rock genre. And I will not spoil it for you, but as you're watching the Yacht Rock documentary and wondering why Steely Dan isn't interviewed, you find out at the end why Steely Dan isn't interviewed, and it's a great surprise. I just want to say that.
Yeah, that's the part I didn't want to touch, because when I was going through the whole thing, I was like,
Yeah,
Walter and Donald, are they dead?
Yeah, Walter's gone.
Yeah.
But Donald's still there, and he wasn't in the documentary. And I thought, this is very odd. And at the end, they explained what happens.
I love the fact that you've set up for Christmas, by the way, in your home, even though you're going to be disappearing for 2 weeks, but you'll be all set when you come back for Christmas. Because you're on your way to England.
We are. We're getting this done just before we board the plane for England this weekend. We're going to London, Manchester, and Liverpool. You won't be surprised to hear this. The trip is built around Paul McCartney and Manchester United. So I'm looking forward to it because I've been to Italy so many times. That's my dad's side. And my mom's side is British, and I haven't paid much attention to it, and I want to explore more of the country. And we had such great Christmas traditions in our house, complete with the paper hats and the crackers, and Christmas was a big, big deal in our house. And when I was a kid, I always thought that came from the Italian side of the family. Wrong. It's the Brits who go crazy for Christmas, like insanely crazy for Christmas. And I can't wait to, we chose this time of the year to go because we're going to get to see, these massive decorations and Christmas markets and get a little taste of how England celebrates Christmas, which is apparently really, really special. Looking forward.
What's with the shit desserts?
Hey, there's nothing wrong with sticky toffee pudding.
Yeah.
What's with the shit desserts?
Cake with fruit in it, mince pie, Christmas pudding, Yule log.
Do you like sticky toffee pudding? You live in Winnipeg. Go to Costco and get the sticky toffee pudding. Oh, boy. It's one of the only things we miss about British Columbia.
Speaking of which, you got out of there. Why'd you move back east?
We didn't like BC at all. BC is it's got a little bit of devil in her. She lures you in with the mountains and the beauty. I was just telling somebody last night, if you stand by the Pan Pacific Hotel downtown Vancouver and you gaze at the mountains on the North Shore while the seaplanes are taking off and the cruise ships are coming in, and it's a sunny day, you do that "should we live here" that you see online, and you'll be lured in by its beauty. It's stunning. British Columbia is stunningly beautiful, but we found, just our personal experience, very, very boring, very beige. The people were unkind. I had two friends there, one on the island that I've known for 35 years. We met in Winnipeg. And another friend that lives in Burnaby, my buddy Quentin. We've been friends since we were 15. And we lived there for over 3 years. Talked to one of our neighbors, and Jess worked 2 different jobs and made one friend. Everything from we didn't find that the food was great, but again, I'm not a fan of Indian food, and there's only so much Asian food you can eat. But what I came to realize, Matt, is I'm a Quebecer. That's what it is. I'm English, but I'm a Quebecer, born and raised in Quebec, and everything about Quebec, the yelling, the screaming, the arguing about politics, the loud talking with the hands, all of that stuff that, I used to complain about. I came to realize it's what makes, I think, and I'm biased because I'm born and raised here, Quebec, I think, is the most interesting place to live in the country, and it's the most soulful place to live in the country. I missed the Greeks, the Italians, the Jews. I missed a good deli. I missed somebody screaming at me in French. Now that I'm not in the media, I don't have to wallow in that every day. I don't have to swim in the political bullshit that goes on here. But in terms of change of seasons, a good loaf of bread, a great restaurant, a fabulous Jewish deli, really good Greek food, those kinds of things. And it's understandable just from geography why, BC is influenced mostly from, I think, the Asian side of the world. And, Montreal is influenced from the European side of the world. And I think that had a little bit to do with it. But it wasn't for us. And it took us a couple of years. Both Jess and I kept our mouth shut about it to each other. And, one day I came home and I don't remember what the incident was, but I said, this goddamn place. And she said, yeah, have you been thinking this too? And I said, yeah. And we started to confess to each other that, we tried it all. We went to White Rock. We went to Whistler. We went to Seattle to see the baseball team. We tried to get it to Seattle. Well, we did get to Seattle to see a bunch of concerts. Climate Pledge Arena is the nicest arena in North America. We went to see a Seattle baseball team whose name is
Mariners.
Thank you. We went to the Mariners a bunch of times. We did all the things that West Coast people do, and we realized we weren't West Coast people. And when we moved there, we lived in a townhouse in the Fraser Valley. And this should have been our first clue. I tell this story to everybody who asks. Excuse me. The day we were moving in, I can't remember what it was. Jess's dad was there and was helping us assemble something. And we were missing, I think it was a Phillips screwdriver. You know how much I know about tools. And went next door. And I said, surely to God, the neighbor, must have a screwdriver. Went next door, rang the bell. And a gentleman opened the door. And I said, hi. I said, my name's Terry. My wife, Jess, and I just moved in next door to Unit 3. We just moved here from Quebec. He said, hello. And I said, I'm wondering if I could trouble you. We're trying to assemble something and we seem to be missing a Phillips screwdriver. I was wondering if we could borrow one from you. And he leaned back and there was that kind of silence. And then he leaned forward and he said, I can lend it to you, but I need it back by 2:00. And I was momentarily stunned and I said, yeah, sure. I'll have it back to you in 20 minutes. And he closed the door and he went to get the screwdriver and he opened the door and he handed it to me. And I said to Jess, if you knock on someone's door, and you know this because you're from here, you knock on someone's door in Quebec and say, hi, my name is so-and-so and we just moved in and can I borrow a screwdriver? 8 times or 9 times out of 10, the neighbor would say, hang on, I'll get my tools. They're going to come over and help you. What are you guys doing? Everybody who lives here understands that story. I don't know if anybody who lives in BC doesn't get that story. And you see it online. People complain about the coldness of BC online all the time. And Jess and I don't know what it was or is. It's like you're lured in by the mountains and then you get there and people are like, yeah, you're not, yeah, don't, no. We have friends already. No.
Yeah, you're also subject to about 250 days of gray.
Yeah. And, even that didn't bother us after a while. We kind of got used to that. I was telling you before we started to record this, there's a foot of snow here in the Laurentians. And that was the other thing. I know this sounds really trite because you hear it all the time, but we miss the seasons. And you know that, we moved back to Quebec in July and we were up in the Laurentians for the end of summer, the turn of the seasons in the fall. And then the winter dump of snow that we got yesterday. And there's something about that wraps its arms around me, and I tell people, I think it's about, some people I guess are more adept at moving around and just adapting to places. Maybe I don't have that in me, but one day I was standing at the corner of Fraser Highway and 200th in the Fraser Valley. If you're from the valley, you know where I'm talking about. And I was standing waiting for the light to turn and I was looking around and I thought to myself, none of this means anything to me. I don't have any connection here at all. I know where the Fraser Highway is. I've been on it 1,000 times. I've been going out to British Columbia for 20 plus years. Loved it out there, but always looked at it through holiday eyes. And if I stand at the corner of Atwater and Sherbrooke, I have a connection to that place. And my brain is triggered with all kinds of memories, from the Montreal Forum to my first apartment at Alexis Neon to your mother's place to, Green Avenue. Like there's I'm connected to that place. And I realized I was adrift in BC. I had no connection to the place at all, other than going up there for holidays.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Atwater and St. Catherine. I'm waiting for you to say that you had a connection with Big Mac large fries and a Coke to the McDonald's that was there for like the longest time.
Yeah, I worked there during the Olympics in '76.
Yeah. So I mean, it's funny because we travel so easily when there's a paycheck and a radio station at the other end, which is the great love. And now that it's not there, and it hasn't been there for me for over 10 years, my connection to where I live here in Winnipeg has changed radically, in that really it's just kids, right? Yeah. Kids and people, and it's where my house is, it's where I'm living for now. But in terms of, friends and people, for me, I have more of a connection with the people, either online that I go to visit every year, and especially over in Spain, just, people that you meet, that, we follow and we'll get together with once a year. And I think this really speaks about Canada. And by Canada, I mean English Canada, that something about Canadians, that it's not what it's changed. Like it feels very suburban, a lot of people in cars. The culture, especially trying to launch podcasts and get like a national podcast across the country, I would find with the personalities that it would very much be regional downloads. And there's very, very few things in Canada that connect us culturally, with our entertainment, with our food even.
It's such a big country. I think geography is part of the problem. We drove back to Quebec, and we loved the drive, and Jess wanted to do the drive. And you really notice it when you drive across the country. It's, it changes. We left Langley, we went Langley, Calgary, Regina, Winnipeg, Thunder Bay, Sault Ste. Marie, and, et cetera, et cetera. And you realize, you feel the change in every town that you go to, in every section of the country that you arrive. It's almost like, in my eyes, because of the time I've spent in and across the country, with the exception of the Maritimes, the Maritimes better than I do, but, it's almost like BC is its own little country. The prairies are their own little country. Northern Ontario is way different than Southern Ontario. Those are almost like two little countries in themselves. Quebec, I don't have to tell you about Quebec. They want to be their own country. And then the Maritimes is, it's a whole other region again. And what's fascinating for me when I look back is, I think this maybe had something to do with age and the excitement of the era that I was in. When I moved to Manitoba, when I moved to Churchill and then spent time in Winnipeg, I experienced so much joy and had so much fun in Manitoba that it became one of my favorite places, still is to this day. When I come to visit you, I know Winnipeg has changed so much since I was there, but people were, it was a different era, maybe, I don't know, but people were really kind, and there was a real community in Winnipeg when I started at CITI FM. And even when I moved out to Calgary from Montreal in 2008, I enjoyed my time there before I came back to Montreal again. So I don't know. I think radio helps inject you into the community quickly, or at least it used to. I don't think it does anymore. And that helps you connect to the community. And I think you experienced that. When you went out to Winnipeg to work in radio, that's what injects you into the community, and then you become part of it. But I agree with you. Things have changed. Maybe it's COVID. Maybe people just scattered during COVID and haven't come back to the community thing. One of my favorite things when I lived in Winnipeg was, I remember the first time somebody said to me, "We're going to go to a social on Saturday." What? What is it? What's a social? What is that? That's the thing where you raise money for a wedding and everybody gets drunk and you go to the local park chalet. It's like, what kind of nonsense is this? And had some of the most fun in my life at socials over the years. Do they still do them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. It's that's a unique Winnipeg thing. I mean, maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but I never heard that in Alberta. I don't know if they do it in Saskatchewan, and they certainly don't do it in Quebec or in Ontario, as far as I know. That speaks, I guess, to the size of the country and how different the regions are. And I agree with you. We've all kind of moved into bubbles, I think.
Let's talk about radio again for a second.
Sure.
Because you got on your show, on your podcast, and I think some people heard on your show when you were talking about, embracing the Jewish community with all, there's a lot of shit going on in Montreal, and everybody can read that. You can read the New York Post if you'd like, where I'll put the article in the show notes for anybody who wants to spend their Christmas reading that. But you spoke up. And I think that is sorely missing from media today.
Yeah.
I haven't heard anybody speak up anywhere about anything, giving opinions. It's almost as if we spent the last 10 years not sharing perspective. It's a vacuum. It is gone from media, and media is suffering and disappearing. And I think this is why.
There's I'm beating a dead horse, and I'm not telling anybody anything that, people don't know, but the media business has been hollowed out. All you have to do is go into a radio station anywhere, in the big cities. You've seen it this week in Toronto, CP24, which I thought was a viable and fairly big newsroom. They shut it down and moved what was left of it to Scarborough, so out of the downtown core. Where in the old days, if you were on Queen Street and there were in the garage or behind the building, there's a bunch of news trucks and lots of reporters. Something happens downtown, boom, people are out. Well, now you're out in Scarborough, and something happens. I don't know. I guess, you drive up the 401 and try and get there when you can. And that's for whatever number of bodies are left. There are a lot of buildings in the media market that are just empty. They're like literally been hollowed out. And it's a metaphor, I think, for what's happened to the radio and television business in the country. It's hollowed out. So there's no big voices anymore. There's no, locally respected, in Winnipeg, it was Peter Warren. In British Columbia, it was Jack, I've forgotten his name now.
Bill Good.
Bill Good was one. And there was the Scottish guy, who had the television show, whose name is escaping me, and I'll remember later. Big voices that had impact and respect and were people of substance, people who really knew shit, people who spent the weekend, reading 9 newspapers, and, people who were intellectual and, politically aware and weren't afraid to say, this is anti-Semitic nonsense and it has to stop. And why aren't people calling it out? There's no platform for that anymore. Anybody who listens to the radio, no matter where you are in the country, it's, hi, everybody. Here's Taylor Swift on the boom, the beat, the goat, the cow, the pig, the whatever, whatever the new trend is. There isn't, we were talking earlier about collaboration and people getting together in a room. When, to refer back to the beginning of our conversation, when CHOM was trying to decide what direction to go to, there was like 7 or 8 people in a room, all contributing ideas, trying to collaborate and make the best decision. And they were all people of musical background or, some kind of, radio background, substance, people who knew what they were doing. And I don't mean any disrespect to people who are still in the radio business, but that's in radio and television, that's not their purview anymore. They're not interested in that. They're big companies. They're the same people, same kinds of companies that own the grocery stores, the telecommunications companies, and the airlines. They want to make sure that they get every dollar out of the monthly performance so their stock price stays up, and they run them, according to the MBA plan book. So there's no room there for, for responsibility to journalism or contributing to the community or doing a radiothon for the hospital. None of that matters to people who are corporate soldiers. Their job, and I understand it because I own stocks, I get it, but that disease infected the media business a long time ago. Just this week, Bell Media in Montreal pushed all of their products together under one roof. So they took the French and English newsroom and pushed it under one roof with one news director. I suspect there are going to be more people losing their jobs. And made the French and English radio stations that are owned by Bell Media pushed all under one umbrella. And that only means one thing. If we're all under one umbrella, now we don't need you over there and we don't need you over there. So to go all the way back, I'm being long-winded about this, but there's nobody of substance to speak out and say, this is wrong. We have to stop and make some kind of impact that would make people listen. And I couldn't do it anymore. A good friend of mine who I've known for a very, very long time. I met him and his family when he was 16, and we've been friends ever since. And John said to me right after October 7th, why aren't you speaking out? Why aren't you using your platform to say something? And I said, John, I'm not going to get into a fight with trolls on Twitter and these useful idiots that are wrapping the Palestinian flag around them and spewing hate. What difference am I going to make by telling people on Twitter they've got it wrong? It's not, it doesn't do any good. And a year later, much to my embarrassment and shame, I apologized to him. I sent him a note and I said, you were right and I was wrong. I should have spoke out a long time ago. I have a small platform. We have a little local podcast. I don't know if I'm going to move any minds. I have, a few people following me on Facebook, but I said what I had been feeling for too many months. I was sickened and ashamed and saddened to watch what was happening to the Jewish community in the country. And I couldn't believe Canada was standing by and letting it happen. Yeah, everybody has a right to say what they want. I get that. But long ago, months ago, it crossed over into blatant, ugly hate. And if you know your history, it smells of 1938. And I said to Ted, my partner on our local podcast, I said, I want to address this today. I want to, I posted something on Facebook and applauded a company called Second Cup who moved swiftly after they identified a franchisee who was spewing hate in Toronto. They took the franchise away from that person. And I applauded them on Facebook. And we heard from them, a lot of people in the Jewish community who said, thank you. We're quietly scared. We're afraid to say something. We don't like what's happening. And, chillingly, a friend of Ted's who's in the Jewish community said his wife said to her, it's times like these when we start to think about who would hide us if it came to that. What kind of conversation is that to be happening at a kitchen table in Canada in 2024? Wake the fuck up. You can talk about, nobody wants to see anybody die. Nobody wants to see people getting hurt. Nobody likes war. But when you stand in front of somebody and spit on them or, accuse them of being collaborators just because of the religion they practice, we're in a world of trouble. I mean, some people everywhere, I think, have to start speaking out. And I'd like to think that, I've seen some evidence of it online that it looks like, the Jewish community is starting to organize and push back. And we just wanted to stand next to them and say, this, Matt, Montreal would be nothing without the Jewish community. Nothing.
No. Nothing.
They just like the Irish and the Italians, the Italians built every church. The Irish helped run the city in the early 1900s. I don't have to tell you about French Canadians. And the Jews helped build the city and make the city what it is. And it wouldn't be Montreal without the Jewish community. And there's a huge Jewish community here, thriving. And a lot of them are scared, and rightfully so. And it's shameful. It's absolutely shameful. I'm sorry I got off on a bit of a rant there, but it's a topic that means a lot to me.
Yeah, but here you are speaking up on your podcast.
Yeah,
and there are media outlets, and they are silent.
Yeah, and I don't know what I don't know what it is. It's silence from media people, from businesses, and from politicians. I mean, it's everybody blames the Prime Minister, but the Prime Minister, it's not his purview to make sure that people don't close down intersections in the middle of our major cities. That's up to the mayors. And the mayor of Toronto and the mayor of Montreal have been absolutely disgustingly quiet and have really abdicated their responsibility to keep people safe in their cities. Never mind your fucking bike paths. How's about making sure the roads are plowed and citizens don't feel afraid to identify as a Jewish person walking in front of the street? Are not afraid to go to synagogue. Like, what is wrong with what? Like, do the politicians not have internet? Are they not seeing what's going on? Anyway.
They're in pass the buck territory. I also would have accepted cowardly.
Cowardly is good too.
Cowardly, yeah.
It's really shameful. And to your point, and the genie's out of the bottle. The horses are out of the barn. Blah blah blah. A lot of it has to do with the completely diminished media presence in the country. I stopped watching news a long time ago because even if you watch the CBS Evening News, there's 8 minutes of stories at the front of the newscast, maybe 9, but about 8, 2-3 big stories, and then 30 seconds, and then commercials, and then a 30-second news hit and commercials, and 30 seconds. And those 30-second pieces they're running are from the internet. And if you watch local news, they too have come to the format where 6 or 7 minutes up front is a story from their 2 local reporters that they have left. And the rest is all filler from, either online or, here's a cute story from Chilliwack where a horse got out on the road. I stopped watching it a long time ago. And you and I have this conversation every year. No one gives a shit what I think, but I never leave the house without a podcast. Never. My phone is always loaded with podcasts. I have favorites. And now that I live in the Laurentians, when I'm going to Montreal, I'm usually an hour drive. And there is nothing interesting on the radio. And there are some things on the radio that are outright embarrassing. There's a bunch of things on the radio, that, I quickly dial around and go, oh God, Jesus God. And I guess you can listen to the radio for music or, if you're a contest person, but I don't know. I can listen to my own music that I picked that's on my phone,
Yeah.
and I'm more stimulated by, podcasts of very, very high quality with high quality people doing them at a high level. And you can't say that about most radio in the country anymore. Because as a radio person said to me, we're doing I said, how are you doing? We're doing the best with what we have. In other words, I'm holding it together with gaffer tape and glue. That's not a compelling reason to tune into radio.
Yeah, and I see the number of people who have been let go in the last 6 weeks, whether it's Bell, Lots at Rogers, Cumulus in the States, iHeart. And I'm like, what exactly are you going to be putting out there? Because you're letting people go, and it's a people business. So I don't really understand that.
There's there's a radio station in Vancouver called Sonic, and there was a big brouhaha about, Sonic's going to do this and that. And then they slowly started to let people go. And just before we left, I said, Jess, look at this. They've got 2 people left. They're going to have a guy work from 6 to noon and the other guy work from noon to 6. And the rest is going to be taped nonsense. There's only 2 people left in that building. Now there's nobody in that building. They let the 6 to noon guy go. And I think maybe the noon to 6 guy's still there. I don't know what he's doing, but that's not what you call connecting to the community. It boggles my mind, because radio has always been about communication and human connection. It's not about Aerosmith and Taylor Swift. It never has been. It's always been about the connection to the community and the connection you make with people. It's people talking to people. That was the magic of radio, that you could reach through the speaker and make a connection with somebody at their kitchen table, and they became your friend for life. In the era that we were lucky enough to work in, I still get people who tell me, I remember, my father drove us to LCC and we left the house at 7:30 and you did this thing at 7:47 and we all laughed. And, you called me on my birthday, and, you become part of the community. That's all gone. That's all been consulted out, or nobody cares about birthdays, and do a question poll and make sure you're on Facebook. Facebook's a great promo tool. It has nothing to do with what Marconi had in mind, and that was lost a long time ago. So that's my personal opinion. I'm sure there's people that still listen to the radio and love the radio, but I can tell you it's a shrinking pool of people.
Yeah, if you ask people why they want to listen to the radio, 2018, the number one reason started to become personalities.
Well, sure.
Right. Starting in 2018, because it used to be about music, but then, in came Spotify, and so people could get their music elsewhere. Yeah. But when the listeners saying we want personalities, and then the radio stations are giving you less of that, then
radio didn't react to that, because they reacted to it financially. A lot of the big names across the country were moved aside because of financial considerations. The conversations that I know that were had in head offices, because I know people that worked in head offices, were, why are you paying this guy? This guy's making $250,000. Can't you find someone to do it for 80? Well, you can. You absolutely can. But, to me, it's the equivalent of hiring, a professional plumber who's been plumbing for 20 years, or calling your cousin Al to come and help you. You know what I mean? You kind of get what you pay for. And, there was an era in radio where, and I was part of it, where, we were paid ridiculous amounts of money. Not the millions of dollars that people think, but, I made a 6-figure income for many years, like a mid 6-figure income, that was considered absurd by people who were in the financial departments. I know that people at Bell Media looked at my contract when it was coming to an end and said, what are you doing? Why would you be paying this guy this much money? And nobody said, well, he's been in the community a long time and draws a lot of listeners. They didn't think that mattered. That it's like, well, you just get somebody to turn on the microphone and we'll get listeners. We don't have to pay anybody that. But as we now know, everything is about content and compelling content. You watch YouTube because you're looking for content. You get your music from Spotify. It's your content. You watch Netflix for the content. Explain to me what the content is on the radio. Explain it to me. I don't know what it is.
You'll love this. The ratings came out in across the country yesterday for diary markets. And
Yes.
they're still compiling ratings with diaries in some markets, especially Ottawa, Winnipeg. So I opened up just for fun, 18 to 34-year-old adults.
Okay.
And I compared yesterday's release with 2013.
Okay.
There were 300,000, this is the CUM, 300,000 18 to 34s who listened to a radio station back in 2013. Today, there are 100,000.
Yeah.
So that's 2/3 gone. 200,000 people just gone. It's all that tuning is gone.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, everything that I see in front of me, and I got so sick of, you're being really negative, but now I'm going to be really negative. For radio, it's essentially over. And I'll just present some things. Stephen King closed his radio stations in Bangor, Maine. He's got 3 of them. He's got some FMs. He's not selling them. He's closing the station.
And he was a radio junkie.
Yes. Bell Media, AM radio station in Winnipeg at 1290. They closed it. They didn't sell it. And I have some money, at least enough that I wanted to, at this point in life, buy a radio station. Terry, we could have gone splits on a radio station by now. And you don't see us running to go buy anything because you buy it, the transmitter's expensive, and pretty much everything we would want to do, we can do on the internet. I'm not sure how to monetize that nearly as well. Tougher to build a community online. But to my point, we would never make our money back.
No.
Yeah. And so I'm here to say that unless somebody finds another way to use these transmitters, it feels over.
I don't disagree with that. And we laugh because, my wife, Jess, was in radio for a long time. And, I would say to her when ratings came out, look at this. They're crowing about being number one. And she said, yeah, but what they're not telling people is the pool has shrunk. They're number one with a much smaller group of people, and no one's telling anybody that they're yelling, yay, we're number one with this small group of people. To your point, we're number one 1834, but not with 300,000 of them, with 100,000 of them. And you and I both know people in their 20s. I don't know anybody who listens to radio. I don't know anybody who's talked to me about something exciting that's happened on radio. And I used to believe if you, like a local newspaper, ran a local radio station and did it right with the local community and tried to build a community in, places like here in Montreal, like there's a radio station in Hudson that's owned by Evanov that is, so poorly run and programmed out of Toronto, and the people that are running it don't know what they're doing and make no connection to the community. I think to myself, if me and you and, Rob Braid and a couple of people got involved, we could make that go. But I think that's retired radio guy dreaming. I don't know if we could do that anymore. I don't know if you could, bang on the local doors and get local advertisers to support you and, have local gatherings and fundraisers like we used to do. I guess that era is over. And I suppose the big companies are doing what they can to survive. But you and I are both on the same page on this. I want to know where the CRTC is, because radio was a public trust. and the airwaves are supposedly owned by the public, and the companies were granted licenses to manage those airways for the public, and you had to follow rules. You couldn't just turn the fucking lights out. You couldn't just say, well, we've got one guy working noon to 6 and there's nobody else in the building. But now you can. The CRTC, you don't even have to phone them and say, hey, we're closing 1290. We're just turning the lights out. They're also partially to blame. But to your point, what do you do with them? Well, what do you do with these? I remember when I worked at CITI FM, we bragged about 360,000 watts of power across Manitoba. Doesn't mean anything today. So, okay, so you can listen to us in Dauphin? Okay, I'm online. Yeah. I'm on the internet.
I will give you a little radio good news story.
Oh, good.
Something the big 92 CITI FM, big chunky ratings number. And they are broadcasting live from a mall raising money for a hospital today. So
absolutely love it.
So not all is lost.
God love them. Good for them.
Yeah. I think there's too many radio stations all doing the same thing, but it's good to see. Go ahead.
Who does their morning show?
Joe Aiello, Phil Aubrey, and Shalinda Kirby.
Who does their afternoon show?
I don't know.
Who does their evening show?
Howard Manshine.
There you go. And there's an example of why you keep quality people around, and people. Howard Manshine is a legend in that town.
Yeah.
And good on them for making sure Howard is still part of the mix.
There would be a big problem if he was not.
Yeah.
And that station's owned by Rogers, who did a bunch of cuts.
Yeah. I don't. Maybe they recognize. CITI has the heritage. I was lucky enough to be at CITI when it started. I was there a couple of months after it changed to rock and roll. It went from classical to rock and roll, and got in trouble with the CRTC because they didn't ask permission to change to rock and roll, and then had to spend a few months bowing down to the commission while the commission decided whether or not they were going to allow it to be a rock station. And boy, that station was legendary from the 1978 when they went to rock. I got there in June of 78. I was gone in 80 whatever, but through the 70s and 80s, I mean, I know there was the fight with power, but CITI FM, I think, is to Winnipeg what CHOM is to Montreal. No, Matt?
Yeah, that's right.
Agree with that?
Yep. Yeah. It is now.
Yeah.
When you say rock station, that's the one people think of.
Yeah.
I want to talk about your podcast again a little bit, just because you mentioned it's a local podcast, but I'm here to tell you that's the future, because all the local needs to be replaced, right? Because it's disappeared. So Adam Curry, who's, one of the founders of podcasting and one of the original MTV VJs, pointed out that the opportunity for podcasts is local because all the media has been sucked up.
I was so thrilled when you sent me that article, and Matt sent me the article about Adam Curry with a note that said, "You're ahead of the curve." And I was so excited about it, because my theory was, I'm not an educated man, but one thing I know, and one thing I spent my life dedicated to, was communication and broadcasting. And my theory was, and it's not just my theory, when Ted and I did a morning show, Ted Bird and I did a morning show for many years, and people knew us in the community as Terry and Ted. It had Terry and Ted in the morning had a certain lifespan, and it's, I hate to use the word brand, but it is, people, a lot of people of a certain age in Montreal would, even people that didn't listen to us went, yeah, I know who those guys are. And when we started to do the podcast, I said to Ted, I don't know how to break through. The podcast is the wild podcast, land of podcasts, the wild, wild west. They're just like hundreds of thousands of them. It was kind of like trying to figure out my hair. There was just no way to navigate it. And as radio diminished in its attachment to the community, I thought we should just make this a local podcast. There are Montrealers who are looking for that, because the style of radio that Ted and I did, that doesn't exist anymore. The sort of long form, a lot of fun, never mind your poll question of the day and all of that. What we did doesn't exist anymore. And I said, maybe we'll be filling a hole, and maybe we can support local events, support local communities, say hi to people, whatever. And we'll focus it locally and see if it works. And, when I moved back to Montreal in July, we went to a weekly format. So we record every Tuesday. The episode comes out every Wednesday morning at 7. And we set up an email account. And, first part of the podcast now, we answer email and talk about things in the community. And I was stunned. I don't know why I was stunned, but a couple of weeks ago, I had mentioned offhand, I said hi to somebody that I ran into at a restaurant. I'm a big, one of my favorite restaurants in town is a place called the Monkland Tavern. And I happened to mention on the podcast that we were at the Monkland Tavern, and Barb and Josh, who run the tavern and own the tavern, were very kind to us. We had a nice time and blah, blah, blah. And really, the episode came out on Wednesday morning, and Wednesday night, I got this text from Barb saying, "I'm so excited. I listened to the podcast and thank you so much for what you said." And you know this, Matt, that's exactly what happens on the radio, right? You make a connection with somebody, and even though it's not on the radio, she was listening while she was cooking, and she was like, "Hey, he's talking about us." That's the way radio works. That's the way radio worked for years. The famous peeve of mine and topic with program directors, nobody cares about birthdays. I always insisted that if you make a connection with one person and that, 40 people say, I heard your name on the radio. That's the way mass communication works. Anyway, that's what we did. And I'm telling that story about Barb and Josh because I'm starting to notice that. I'm starting to notice people, saying to us, like out in the community, I'm used to getting recognized. This sounds like I'm an asshole, but you've been with me, because I've been in the community so long, people sometimes recognize me, and I'm used to getting recognized once in a while by people who say, "Hey, Terry, used to listen to you all the time," and wave. And I've been taken aback in the last month by people who have now said, "Hey, Terry, love the podcast." And I thought, oh, okay, maybe I'm not wrong. And believe me, we're not setting the world on fire. We're not chasing Joe Rogan. But what we are doing, I think, and it bears out in the numbers of downloads, that slowly, people are saying, we're getting emails from people saying, I look forward to Wednesday morning because after the kids go to school, I pour my coffee and I put your podcast on. Reminds me of when you guys were on the radio. Or people will say, I'm doing Christmas baking and I'm listening to your Christmas episode from 2 years ago. So people seem to be, and it's all anecdotal, we've got no consultants or research people, but it seems to me that people are using it like they used to use radio. And they're interested in what we have to say about the community that we're sharing. So that's why I thought a local focus was a better idea. I can't compete with Peter Mansbridge. I can't compete with I can't even compete with Mo and Wendy Mesley. We don't have that national profile, but we do have a profile in Montreal, and this. It's the same in Winnipeg, Montrealers are really proud of Montreal and really love their city, and they want to hear their city reflected back to them. That's the way I used to do the morning show. I used to say to people, reflect the city back to the people who are listening, and it worked. And when I was doing morning radio, my growth was tiny. You'd go from like a one share to a 1.4 to a 1.7 to a 1.8. And I remember back then saying, God damn it. And Robbie saying to me, no, you don't want this, because with this comes this. If you've downloaded this podcast, I'm doing an up and down motion with my arm. So in other words, if you shoot up too fast, you come down really quickly. But if your graph of listenership looks like a set of stairs, you're on the right path.
So I'm very, very curious to see how your show does now that you're back and doing this on a weekly basis, because that means consistency. People know to get it at Wednesday, 7 a.m. is when you release it. Personally, I would make sure that thing's out at midnight so that everybody wakes up with it on the phone and downloaded.
Yes.
I'll send you my bill for my consulting on that. But
Totally.
I firmly believe that consistency is 20% of the marks. I bet you in your case, it's probably another 30% on top of what you were doing before, where you were just doing, 10 episode seasons. So the consistency is huge. And I've been looking for years. Oh, what are the similarities between, radio and podcasting? And I think you kind of hit on something here where it's the same show you've always done, only it's on demand.
Yeah, that's kind of it. And it's, like I said, I recognize, again, it's anecdotal, but I recognize the signs. Like the first time the guy said to me, he was in a plumbing truck, and he was coming out of the Tim Hortons, and he didn't have time to stop because it was his work day. And, he looked up and he said, "Hey, Terry, love the podcast." And he kept moving. And I thought to myself, this is the first time that's happened. And this is what I noticed when I was doing radio. This was long before the internet, and we would go to, every event. I said to Patty, who I was working with at the time, we're going to go to everything. We went to high schools, and we went to McGill, and we went to charities, and we did everything for free. And we shook hands, and we wrote names down and said hello, and slowly started to build an audience. And you start to notice things. One of the things I was saying to Ted the other day, I was lucky enough to do 2 television shows in my lifetime. One was Switchback, which was a kid's show in the early 1980s for CBC. And the other one was a show called Fighting Back, which was for a local CTV station, which was a consumer affairs kind of show. And somebody said to me, "You only do television with the word back in it." And when I did Switchback, I became accustomed, because this television is really powerful. You can go on TV twice and people recognize you. And when I was doing Switchback, I got used to getting recognized by little kids. So I'd be in a mall and I'd get recognized by little kids. And then when I started doing Fighting Back, I would be in a grocery store, and I would start to get approached by, people over 50, typical people who watch news kind of television shows. So those are small signs of how your audience is shifting, and they're small signs of whether or not you're building an audience. And I started to recognize that in radio. The phone started to ring. "Can you come and host this? We have a charity event. Will you help us?" And those things are happening on a very, very, very small scale with the podcast. People asked us we went to a toy drive event this past week. We were asked to go, Ted went to a Remembrance Day ceremony. We were asked to host a fundraiser that was a comedy show, and there are small things that we're doing out in the community where people are saying everything from, "I love your podcast," to "What are you guys doing now?" to "What time does your podcast come on?" But we're starting to notice that, the little thing that we did for fun is starting to get noticed by people in the community. And that's very, very similar to what happened when I was hosting radio shows. So you could be right. It's radio on demand. And that's the lens I was looking at it through. People who listen to Terry and Ted at Mix 96 in the 90s will find a similarity to listening to the Standing By podcast with Terry and Ted. We got a note from somebody in our email box last week from somebody who said, I don't live in Montreal. I forget where, I think he said Calgary. And I needed a Montreal fix. And there you guys were. Terrific. Keep it up. So here's hoping that, I'm retired. If I'm not doing it for the money, not doing it for the, attention. We do it because we love sitting in front of microphones and telling stories. And we hope people come along for the ride. And as long as people come along for the ride, we'll continue to do it.
Speaking of rides, you've got one. You're going to England and you're going to go to Manchester. I think you will be seeing a Manchester United game and riding in on a sea of alcohol. And hopefully they come out with a win. Because it's a lot of cranky pants people if they don't win. And I'm looking at the table right now, and they need 3 points.
They do. The game we're seeing is against Bournemouth, so we're hoping for the 3 points. Jess is quite pleased with the managerial change, and quite annoyed with the performance of the team in the last 10 years, and doesn't like being in the middle of the table, but likes to think that there's a turn around. But I've come to understand since I married Jess and learned more about football, that Manchester United is the way people feel about Man U, or it's the way people feel about the Montreal Canadiens.
Yeah.
There's a heritage there and a history there, and having a seat at Old Trafford is going to be very, very special.
All right. Well, we'll follow you on Instagram and other social media platforms to see those adventures and others.
Can I mention something before somebody says otherwise?
Yeah, of course.
I'm not sitting down with the Prime Minister this year for our annual Christmas chat. And a lot of people will say his friend has abandoned him in his time of need. I'm going to England. I'm traveling in December for the first time. And I spent the last 2 days on the phone with his team. And we were trying to get it set up before I went away. And who knew? The Prime Minister's kind of busy. And we were not able to put it together. And I said to Jess, people are going to think, I didn't want to sit down with the Prime Minister. And him and I have been sharing texts the last couple of days saying, it's too bad, maybe we'll do it in the new year, because it's an annual tradition where I sat down with him. And because he's, what's the word? He's not popular right now.
Yeah.
He's not popular. he's got a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
And I don't want anybody to say, and I'm going to say this, on social media, I don't want anybody to say, his friend doesn't want to talk to him because he's not popular. He may be the Prime Minister, but he's my friend first. And we love our Christmas chat because it's the only time I get to see him. We sit across from each other and have a beer. And because I'm going to England, we were unable to put the schedule together. I may talk to him in the new year. So
yeah,
wanted to mention that.
Good. Well, we're going to put that at the front of the show anyway.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I will.
Are you going to edit this?
Yes. But I'm not going to edit this.
Okay.
Terry, Merry Christmas to you and Jess and whatever cat's names I don't understand around you.
Casey and Finnegan.
There we go.
A tribute to Mr. Dress Up, Jess loves. Merry Christmas to you, buddy. I love you dearly, and I really love this thing that we do. And I love the fact that it comes out Christmas Day. I think I thought that was crazy of you because nobody would be listening, but apparently a few people do check it out. So Merry Christmas.
There's a lot of people who want to listen to a podcast on Christmas morning.
That's nice. It really is nice.
Yeah.
That's why our Christmas tree, I turn the lights on.
Just a reminder, too, if you do something consistently over time, people will know it's there. That's why a lot of people listen to this.
Yes. Yeah. This, again, you can send me your consulting bill because it seems to be working out for the Standing By podcast every Wednesday morning at 7:00, everywhere you get a podcast.
I just want the contra. Give me the contra.
Okay.
Merry Christmas, Tara.
Right back at you and Avery and the boys and all of your very large Cundill family.
The Sound Off podcast is written and hosted by Matt Cundill. Produced by Evan Serminski. Edited by Chloe Emo Lane. Social media by Aiden Glassy. Another great creation from the Sound Off Media Company. There's always more at soundoffpodcast.com.